Hi, welcome. Today I'm going to be talking about SQL. I'm going to teach you what SQL means and the concept behind database, tables, columns, rows, and how to use SQL to query them. So let's start by discussing what is. Okay, so what is the database? So I'm sure a lot of people have heard of database. A database is a container that holds tables and other SQL structures related to those tables. Now, what is a table, right? I would like to teach in very simple format, right? So what is a table? I'm sure you guys have all seen Excel spreadsheets or some kind of data in your life, right? I mean, you've seen a list of students or something in your life that looks like a table. So that's what a table is, right? Now, what is a database? A database is basically a container that contains multiple tables. So it's very similar to the concept of how you have say a notebook, and within the notebook you would have different chapters, or a textbook and you have different chapters within the textbook. So it's something like that. All the chapters in the textbook belong to um, one textbook, right? So it's this very similar concept. So when you hear the word database, it's simply a container that holds tables and other SQL structures related to those tables. Now when I say other SQL structures, what I mean is there are sometimes functions and procedures that you can write, but we will skip that for the moment. All you need to know is that a database contains tables. Okay, so what is a database? A database contains multiple tables. Okay, so this is very similar to a textbook containing multiple chapters, right? Now, okay, so now let's look at what is inside a table. Now, table is a structure inside your database that contains data organized in columns and rows. So it's kind of a hierarchy. Okay, so first we have the database, and we said database contains multiple tables, right? So let's say we have table 1, table 2, and so on, right? Table 4, and so on. So that's the tables. Now tables is a structure, is everything is a structure. So table is a structure inside your database that contains data organized in columns and rows. Now a table has columns and rows. It has both. Okay, it cannot just have columns. It has to have columns and rows, because columns, for example, this is a table, right? I mean, think about what a table means. It's very simple, right? This is a table, right? So when you look at it this way, right? Like this, going this way, you say that's all rows, right? These are the rows, right? Now, what are the columns? The columns would be in the different direction, right? This is column 1, this way is column 2, this is column 3, and this is column 4. So this is the columns go this way. Okay, so that's why we say that a table has rows and columns. Now it can have any number of columns and any number of rows. So how many columns does this table has? It has 4 columns, right? And how many rows does this table have? 3 rows, right? Now I can even have a table as little as one box. Okay, so how many rows and columns would be in this? It would just be 1 and 1, right? But this would be a very simple thing. It's not really a good example. Like, you would never want to store just one little thing as a table. Tables are more applicable for scenarios where you have a lot of data and things like that. So that would not be a good use case. But just to let you know, that is still a legit table. So let's do another example of, let's trace another rows and columns and see how many rows and columns we can do. Okay. So for example, if I had a table, right? Right. So how many rows does this table have? I'm asking how many rows, right? So rows go which way? The green way, right? So what's that? What is the green? This is the row. So row 1 and row 2. So how many rows? 2 rows. How many columns does it have? How many columns does this table have? So remember, these are columns. 1 column, 2 columns, and 3 columns. So how many columns? We have 3 columns. So that's very simple things. Now in real life, obviously we're talking hopefully a lot more data. Now as I said, a database can have multiple tables, right? So let's start with an understanding of like what we mean by multiple tables. So basically these tables that I have drawn, right? This could have been with the tables that I just drew now. This is, for example, table 1, right? And this is table 2, right? And I can put them both in a database, right? So say database 1 can have these 2 tables. So that would be how it would be. So once again, what is a column? Column is basically going down like this, and then the rows are number of lines within the table. Okay. Now let's move on to the next section. Let's talk about, why would a database have multiple tables, right? I mean, in reality, what you want to do is you want to have multiple tables so you can actually join, and the data is in some sense related. So for example, I might have one table for which tracks all the student names, right? I know who student 1 is, who student 2 is, what their name is, how old they are, and what's their major. But I may have another table to track what classes they are taking in, and that might be a different table. And obviously you see how these two data would be connected data. So that's why you would split the data, but still the content within a database would in some sense be related, because that would be the purpose. Otherwise you can simply put them in another database. So a column is a piece of data stored in your table, and a row is a single set of columns that describe attributes of a single thing. So a row is, once again, just to summarize, a row is this, right? This is a row. So what we mean by that is a row is a single set of columns, just one set of columns. This entire thing, but all the columns, just a single set. A single set of columns that describe the attributes of a single thing. So, and obviously columns and rows together make up a table. Now, let's see what else I can mention that would be, okay. Now let's talk a little bit about SQL. How do you write SQL statements, right? So I'm hoping you've heard or seen the basic structure about SQL statements, where they say it is select star from, right? I'm hoping you've heard those words, and let's talk about that. So maybe before we jump into that, let's talk about, how do you create a database, right? There are commands for everything. And obviously, like in computer science, everything is command oriented. So you just need to know, how to do certain things. And that's that's all you need to know. Like, I mean, there are commands for everything. So it's very simple. It's a very structured. SQL stands for structured query language. So it is really structured. So all you need to know is the syntax for those commands. So first thing you want to do is obviously create, right? So how do you create a database? The first command you need to really know is you create using this command. Okay, create database. Let's say we want to create a database called Craigslist. Okay, so this is the statement to create the database. These are all keywords. The ones that I'm writing in caps are all keywords, okay? And which means that those are fixed statements. There is nothing else you can do about them. The only thing you can change is this Craigslist or whatever list. For example, if I wanted to create Nora's list, I could do this. Okay, I can change the name of this. So this part is more flexible in terms of changing. These parts you can change and write whatever you want to write. So maybe create database, mm, like my university or something like that. So these, and when you name these variables, you're allowed to use underscores but not spaces. So things, there are some restrictions. I will talk about them later, but basically you're able to allowed to use underscores to differentiate between words. For example, if I wanted to say Nora's list as Nora underscore list, I could have done that. Okay, so that's the way to create database, right? Now, assuming that we have created a database, usually once you create a database, you also need to use the second command that you need to do is state that you want to start using the database, right? So sometimes when you log in into the database, even if it's not your very first time um, in life, but it is the first time for a given day, you need to use this command saying use like whatever database you want to say, because once you log in into the SQL command, it doesn't know which database you want to use, and usually there is no default, so you would have to use the use command and say which thing you want to use. For example, if I want to use Nora list, I would say use Nora list. Again, the word use is a keyword. You cannot change that. This is a fixed keyword, okay? But this would be dependent. Nora's list would be dependent on whatever you name your database. Now, once you have a database, the second thing you would do technically is create tables, right? Like I said, the main thing in a database is tables. So what is the third command you need to know is create. Again, very simple. SQL is very simple. You can simply write, it's as you talk kind of in English, we obviously say create table, but after that there's a little bit of format you need to follow, but other than that there's not much. Um, so say I want to create a table called a book list, okay? Within Nora's list, Nora can have different lists. I can have a list of books or list of technology or whatever I want to do. So I would do that, and then you use parentheses, right? And then what comes within the table, remember we said a table contains rows and columns, right? So in this case you do not have to specify and worry about how many rows, but you have to, when you create, you have to mention the columns, okay? Now in the columns, what you want to do is mention what the columns are, so because that is mainly the structure. The rows can be defined as you go, but remember the columns have to be defined and have to be consistent across. Okay, so let's say I have a book name. Again, this is the name of the column, and there is flexibility in how you name this. And I can say the book type, right? Maybe it's a textbook or it's a digital book or whatever it is. So the book type. Now each column has a type, okay, and the type of the column is like is a fixed thing. Like there's only few options on the types, and so one of the options is a varchar, Again, this is a keyword. Like I said, the types are fixed. Like, you can only have text columns or numeric columns. Basically, that's what it means. So a varchar is the same as saying a text field or a text column, because the name, the name can be, the SQL book or the computer science book, whatever the name is. So that's why I would put this column as a varchar. Again, this is a keyword. And then the second thing, also for the second line, you need to mention the type for that. So I would think maybe this is also going to be varchar, right? Now, but it's going to be only a length of 8. This is what the 10 and 8 mean. The 8 means length. How long is it going to be? That probably means that I can have a book type called, let's see if I have the book type called electronics, right? How many characters is this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. These are 11 single letters, right? Now, is this a valid book type that I can insert as a varchar 8? No, I would not, because then it would get cut off here, right? So if electronics was one of my book types in my data, then I would have to make this more like higher, maybe buffer it and make it 14 instead of 8. So those are the things that's what you're mainly trying to, when you design your table, you're thinking of what are the expected values. So how much should it be, and how much should I allocate, right? So, but something like if I said online, this would have fitted into the 8, right? Because it's only 6 characters long, so that's fine. And the problem with the SQL is, if it's fine if it's longer, what SQL will do is simply truncate it, so it might only store electron instead of electronics, so it will truncate it. So that's the create table statement. Now let's talk about what else should we talk about? Now let's look at how easy it is to write SQL. Okay. um, so we've defined our table, and we'll talk about some data types. So some of the data types, like I said, we only spoke about varchar, but there are a few other data types, and those would be varchar. Let's talk about the data types. These are predefined, okay? This is not something you define. These are just keywords, and they're defined, and we just have to know which one you want to use based on. One of them is varchar. Like I said, varchar means nothing but like string or text, anytime you have text. The other one is decimal, right? Now in decimal, what is an example of decimal in real world, right? 10.2 is an example of decimal, or 100.5 is a decimal. 5, 7, let's say. So how many decimal places? This is 2 decimal places. This is 1 decimal place, right? So in decimals, you can specify again. In varchar, remember, you can specify the length, right? In brackets. The same with decimal, you can specify the length. But in decimal, you have to specify 2 lengths. The first one is the decimal number of length before the dot, and the second is the after the dot. So for 100.56, it would be 3, 2. Okay. For 10.2, it would have been 2, 1. So stuff like that. Always data types have length. So basically, it's a keyword followed by some number in a brackets. That's the format of the data type. The other data types are character. This is used if you have very short strings like yes or no, right? An example of this would be Y or N. If you have a column that says is the student enrolled, and you have flags like yes, no for everybody, that would be an example, right? Then the other data types are date, and the last one I would think of is int. Int is simply like decimal was 10.2. Int would be examples like numbers 11, 12, 500, numbers like whatever numbers, right? Things like that. Those would be examples of int. What would be examples of date? Date would be like 1/1/2014, or whatever the dates would be, right? 12/31/2014. These are examples of dates. So I hope you guys understand what database means, what how to create a table, and how a table has particular structure like column, rows, and the data types. In my next video, I will continue to talking more about you know how to use SQL to query and a little bit more further into the subject. I hope you enjoyed. Please do subscribe to our channel and please like the video if you like it. Thank you.